Hello, and welcome to the Tics and Tourette's workshop. My name is Emma Yibo, and I'm a trainee clinical psychologist. Today I'm going to be talking to you about tics and Tourette syndrome. This workshop is for parents and/or carers of young people who may be struggling with tics and/or Tourette syndrome. This workshop is being run by the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services in North Tyneside as part of Northumbria Healthcare, which is an NHS Foundation trust. This workshop should take approximately 40 minutes, but may last up to an hour. So make sure that you're comfortable and that you have a drink to hand. It may also be helpful to grab a pen and a piece of paper in case you want to jot anything down. Unfortunately, you won't be able to ask me any questions. However, I will do an FAQ at the end of this session, and I will point you to lots of handy resources that may answer any questions that you may have about tics and Tourette syndrome. So today you're here for a tic workshop because you're a parent or carer of a young person in Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. That's CAMS for short. We've had many referrals into our services for young people who are struggling with tic disorders. This support has been requested not only for young people, but also for the support systems around them. So we decided to run this workshop because the majority of tic disorders actually require very little medical or psychological intervention. In fact, the recommended treatment is for psychoeducation for the young person, but also for the support systems around them, from parents and carers to siblings and also schools. And so that is what we're going to discuss in this workshop today. My hope for the session today is that you will go away with an increased understanding about tics and tic disorders, including Tourette syndrome, that you will have an understanding of what to do through the advice that we give for parents and schools, and that you can leave understanding more about the treatment options, an idea of some of the resources out there to support you. So what are tics? A tic is a movement or sound that you make that you don't really want to make. The main characteristic of any tic disorder is an involuntary, rapid, recurrent, non-rhythmic movement or sound. Tics are sudden and purposeless and can occur in any part of the body. Tics are very similar to hiccups in that even though you might not want to hiccup, your body does it anyway. Similarly, in tics, we find that even though people may not want to tic, their body does it anyway. There are many different types of tics. When we are categorizing or naming tics, we think of them in two different ways. The first way is whether they're motor or whether they're vocal. Motor tics would involve movement, such as shoulder shrugs or eye rolling, whereas vocal tics involve sounds, such as throat clearing or making a specific noise. Sometimes vocal tics can be harder to recognize. The second way in which we categorize tics is whether they're simple or complex. Simple tics may be fast and purposeless, such as eye blinking, or complex, such as hitting. Complex tics are slower and tend to involve several muscle groups. Here is a grid with a list of tics split into these categories of simple or complex, motor or vocal. Head and neck tics are the most common. I'll give you a bit of time to look through the list and see if there are any there that you recognize. Some of these tic types you may have seen dramatized in the media. It's important to note that coprolalia, which is the repetitive use of obscene or socially unacceptable words or phrases, is actually one of the more rare tic disorder types. Whereas some of the more simple tics that you see there, such as eye blinking, throat clearing, those are actually more common. Tics come and go and can change over time. We find that the majority of tics start in childhood around the ages of 6 or 7, and then symptoms tend to peak around 11 or 12 years of age and then get less often as children become teenagers. Tics are private and actually tend to happen more when the person is relaxed rather than engaged in activity. We find that tics can also be triggered or increased by environmental factors such as stress, excitement, or relaxation. It may be really helpful for you to encourage your child to think about tics as friends that they need to live with. Friends come and go, they can be annoying sometimes and funny at other times, but it's really important to know and understand your friends well. Some children have many different tics. Other children only have one. Some children have tics all day long, and some only have tics now and then. Absolutely everything is possible because tic disorders occur on a spectrum of different experiences. Some children have tics that just disappear within a year and never come back. We call this temporary or transient tic disorder. Another tic disorder is called chronic tic disorder. This means that you have either movement tics or sound tics that do not go away or come back after they have gone away. A well-known tic disorder is called Tourette syndrome. People that have this syndrome have had different movement tics and at least one sound tic for more than 1 year. Tic disorders as a whole are quite common, with around 18% of primary school age children having a tic at some point in their life. Research has indicated that about 1% of all people have Tourette syndrome. It's important to note that the presence of tics doesn't necessarily mean that the child has Tourette syndrome. However, many resources for tics and a lot of research about tics will be labelled as Tourette syndrome, so we usually try to warn parents of this term because it can be very poorly understood, and like many things, a very singular view is given in the media, such as Tourette syndrome being all about swearing. The most important thing to remember is that tic disorders occur on a spectrum of different experience, from transient tic disorder at one end to Tourette syndrome in another, and within those two categories, there can be a range of different experiences. It's important for us now to talk about Tourette syndrome, because a lot of parents have questions about Tourette syndrome. Does my child have Tourette syndrome? Will my child develop Tourette syndrome? Will my child develop symptoms of Tourette syndrome, such as swearing uncontrollably? So what is Tourette syndrome? Tourette syndrome is an inherited neurological condition. This means that it affects the nerves and the nervous system. Previously, it was thought to be quite rare, and now we know that it affects approximately 1 in 100 children. Tic symptoms will fluctuate in severity and frequency during the day and between days, in a kind of wax and wane pattern. We find that over 85% of people with Tourette syndrome will also experience other co-occurring conditions, but we'll talk more about this a bit later. A quick internet search reveals some people who have come forward as having Tourette's or tic disorders, or there is some speculation that they do have Tourette's or tic disorders. There were some other names listed too, such as David Beckham and Kurt Cobain, but we couldn't find anything to confirm for sure whether they did or didn't have tic disorders, so we decided not to put their names in there. Needless to say, this is proof that Tourette syndrome and tic disorders doesn't need to be something that gets in the way of strength and success. A single definitive cause of tic disorders has not yet been established. However, there are various factors which have been implicated in causing tic disorders. The first is brain differences. Whilst it's not yet clear exactly what causes tics, they're thought to be due to changes in the parts of the brain that control movement. A neurotransmitter is a chemical messenger in the brain, and a neurotransmitter called dopamine and another neurotransmitter called serotonin have both been implicated in tic disorders. Some of the medications we use to treat tic disorders work by balancing the levels of serotonin and dopamine in the brain. You may have heard of these neurotransmitters as they are often implicated in various neurological, neurodevelopmental, and also mental health disorders. Neuroimaging has also shown that the cortex, which is the outer bit of the brain that is made of grey matter, the prefrontal cortex, which is part of the brain that's responsible for planning, organisation and attention, and the striatum, which is a component of the basal ganglia involved in movement, are three of the main areas implicated in tic disorders. Additionally, genetics have a role to play. If you have Tourette syndrome, there's a 25 to 50% chance that your child could show signs such as tics, Tourette syndrome, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD for short, or obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD. No one gene has been shown to cause tics, but there is a lot of research going on investigating exactly which genes are involved in Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. The research so far has shown that there's an overlap between the genes that are involved in Tourette syndrome and the genes of people with OCD and ADHD without tics. Lastly, the environment. Environmental factors have been found to contribute to the severity or the onset of tic disorders. Things such as cannabis use, alcohol use, and also low weight gain during pregnancy have been identified as potential risk factors in tic disorders. Tourette syndrome and tic disorders are associated with quite a number of other mental health conditions. A study in 2015 found that 86% of patients with Tourette syndrome had one other psychiatric diagnosis, whereas 58% had two or more other psychiatric diagnoses. This is known as comorbidity, where there is the presence of more than one disorder in one person. The disorder which is most commonly associated with Tourette syndrome and tic disorders is ADHD. In the general population, we find a rate of ADHD in around 3 to 5% of the population, whereas in Tourette syndrome, the prevalence of ADHD goes up to 55%. Many people who struggle with tic disorders or Tourette syndrome report a sensation that they may sometimes feel prior to the onset of the tic that lets them know the tic is coming. This is something that's separate from the tic itself, and we call it a tic alert, almost like an urge or a premonition or a feeling that a tic may be about to occur. We find that older children and adolescents report more of these sensations and more awareness of when a tic may be about to occur than younger children. We're not quite sure why this is, but it may have something to do with just better understanding and knowledge of themselves and how their bodies work. Here are a couple of quotes from young people with tics about their premonitionary urges. The first person says, "I guess it's sort of an aching feeling in a limb or a body area, or else in my throat if it precedes a vocalization. If I don't relieve it, it either drives me crazy or begins to hurt, or both. In that way, it's both mental and physical." Another young person said, "I need to tic as an intense feeling that unless I tic or twitch, I feel as if I'm going to burst. Unless I can physically tic, all of my mental thoughts center on ticking until I'm able to let out this terrible urge that needs to be satisfied." We will now try an exercise that may demonstrate what it's like to have a premonitionary urge, similar to what someone with a tic disorder might experience. For the next 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to keep your eyes open for as long as possible without blinking. We'll do this now, so I'll count down from 3 to 1, and when I count to 1, I want you to try and keep your eyes open for as long as possible. 3, 2, 1. Ten seconds left. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go. I wonder how you found it. When I first tried this exercise, I only managed to hold myself from blinking for about 10 seconds. I actually found it incredibly difficult. It may be something fun to try with friends and family, just to see how long you manage to keep yourself from blinking. As you know, it is possible to keep your eyes open for a short period of time and avoid blinking. And the more you practice keeping your eyes open for a longer period of time, the easier it will get. But eventually, after some time, you'll have to blink, as the urge is too strong to stop. Similarly to a mosquito bite, if you've ever been bitten by a mosquito or another insect, the itch bites. You'll probably want to scratch the bite as hard as you can, but you know, if you scratch the bite, it won't heal. If you're able to resist the itch and not scratch, then the itch will heal quicker and the itching will stop. And similarly with ticks, ticking is like scratching a mosquito bite. The itchy bite is the same as the feeling that you get before the tick alert. And if you are able to resist the tick alert and not do the tick, the unpleasant feeling will eventually reduce by itself with time and with practice. So what about controlling the tics, you're probably asking? Well, tics are generally experienced as irresistible, but people find that sometimes they can suppress them for various lengths of time. Many children will only have some control over their tics, and while they may be able to hold them in for short periods of time, this may be very difficult for them to do. Some children manage to hold their tics in at school. Some children manage to hold their tics in during specific social functions. However, a lot of young people, and even adults with tic disorders, note that this is quite exhausting and quite difficult to do. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what can we do about tic disorders? And as I said earlier, the majority of tic disorders, including Tourette syndrome, need very little intervention. Psychoeducation is actually recommended as the first line of treatment for tic disorders. Psychoeducation involves providing understanding and knowledge around the disorder, what may cause it, what may make it worse, things that may help, and also strategies that can be used by the young person and the systems around the young person, including families, friends, school, and other wider support networks that the young person may be accessing. In this section, we're going to think about some of these strategies that will be relevant for home, some of the strategies that will be relevant for school, and I'll also highlight some resources that you can access online that will give you access to a lot more strategies that you can use, and will also give you support from people whose children also may be struggling with tic disorders. In this section, we're going to be thinking about the different strategies that we can use in the toolkit of managing tics. It's really important that in this toolkit that you'll use to support your child in managing their tics, that you have a lot of different resources and a lot of different strategies that can be employed different times and in different settings, and so that your child and yourself and also the network around your child feels better equipped to manage any issues that may arise. It's really about building a toolkit. However, before building this toolkit, one of the most powerful things you can do is to try and ensure that the child and everyone around the child in their immediate network, but also in their wider social network, has a bit of understanding of what tic disorders are. This is very vital in helping the child to cope with any of the day-to-day challenges that may come along with a tic disorder. So some of the professional strategies to treat tics that we may employ in CAMS include behavioral therapy and cognitive therapies. Behavior therapy is more geared towards learning activities or things that you can do physically instead of the tics to try and change those behaviors. Whereas cognitive therapy is more about what's going on mentally and psychologically around the tics. Cognitive therapy has shown to be very helpful in adolescence. There are many different types of behavioral therapies. One is habit reversal therapy, or HRT for short. HRT has been in use since the 1970s. HRT uses tic blockers or competing responses. This may involve holding the tic in until the urge to tic goes away. Or it may also involve doing something else instead of the tic. So for example, a child whose tic may involve eye blinking may employ controlled eye blinks. Someone whose tics involve arm jerks may try to manipulate their arms in different ways prior to the tic occurring, such as placing their hand against their leg. Someone whose tic involves shouting words may do things like purse their lips. It's really about doing something else instead of the tic to try and almost counteract the need for that tic to then occur. Exposure and response prevention, ERP for short, is about suppressing the tic, almost holding it in. And you would do this in a graded way for increasingly longer periods of time. We spoke a bit about psychoeducation earlier, but it's more learning about the tics, learning about maybe what triggers them, learning about how tic disorders work, and learning as much as possible about tics. CBITS is known as Comprehensive Behavioural Intervention for Tics. CBITS is a lot easier to say. CBITS is a multi-component package which basically combines all of these behavioural therapies above. This is actually a trained programme which 4 members of CAM staff are able to offer when appropriate. Before assessing or accepting any referrals, it's really important to consider a child's motivation to manage their tics and how bothersome the tics are for them. The presence of tics doesn't also always mean that there's a need for an intervention. Some young people find that they prefer to live with their tics. In addition, a lot of tic disorders resolve in adolescence and early adulthood. To summarise, behavioural therapies involves different strategies which can be learned through online programmes and workbooks which are readily available and some of which we'll highlight in the resources section, but also through CAMS when there is a need. In terms of treatment for tics, people often ask us what medications there are available that may help with tic disorders. Unfortunately, there is no specific drugs that can stop all of the tics. This is partly due to a lack of understanding of what exactly causes tic disorders, but also, as I showed earlier in the grid, tics can be so varied in that they can be simple or complex, vocal or motor, and they can occur in many different ways. So unfortunately, no specific drug can manage all the tic disorders that we know of. There are a variety of different medications that may be used to manage tic disorders. However, these aren't specific medications for tic disorders. We find that medication can reduce the frequency and the intensity of the tics for a period of time. However, all medication, as we know, is trial and error. What works for one person may not necessarily work for another. What works for one person at one time may not continue to work after some time has elapsed. Within CAMS, we really only consider medication in certain cases. For example, if the tics are causing significant pain or discomfort, if there is a self-harm element, such as a hitting element, which is causing damage to the child, if there are significant social problems or anxiety, such as social withdrawal, and also if there's an impairment in functioning, such as a leg twitch or a leg tic, that's making walking difficult and causing the young person to fall down. You're probably wondering, as a parent or a carer, what can I do? And this is completely natural. It's only normal that you'd want to know if there are any things that you can do to make tics go away or to make life easier for your child. There are 2 main strategies for parents to keep within their toolkit of tics. One of the first strategies is around allowing the tics to happen. As we spoke about earlier, tics are involuntary, and being asked to suppress them can be very stressful for the child, and it sometimes causes the child to tic more. Pointing out someone's tics to them without any reason other than to highlight it can be unhelpful, can lead to more stress, which can then lead to increased ticking. Remember that the tics are involuntary and your child is not doing them on purpose or to annoy you or to annoy others. Another strategy is around accepting the tics and ignoring them a little bit. This can really go a long way to helping someone with a tic disorder or Tourette syndrome feel comfortable, as this avoids drawing any unnecessary attention towards them. However, as a parent, a teacher, or a friend, you may feel the need to talk to someone about a particular tic if it is causing them distress or harm. Doing this in itself is okay, as long as it's done in a sensitive and respectful and understanding, non-judgmental way. Talking to someone about a specific tic is very different to highlighting a tic for no apparent reason, or just simply asking a person to stop. It provides them a space to try and maybe talk about some of the difficulties they may be experiencing and to talk about that tic in a non-judgmental space, And this is very different from just highlighting the tic for no reason. At this point, in a face-to-face workshop, we'd usually ask people to have a bit of a discussion about what they think about these two strategies. Because we can't do that, it may be helpful for you at home to write down maybe a couple of ideas you might have about these strategies, whether you agree with them, whether you think they've helped, if you've tried them in the past, and how they went for you. It may be helpful to just spend 5 minutes thinking about this before moving on to the next slide. Some other strategies that might be helpful for you to know as a parent or carer include minimizing situations where you see lots of tics. It may be helpful to you to have a think about some of the situations in which your child tics more and some of the situations in which your child tics less. You may already know this. It may be something new for you, but if you're not sure, it may be helpful in the next few weeks just to keep an eye out. For instance, some people find that their child tics more while they're watching TV. In this way, you might decide to limit screen time. Some people find that their child tics more when they're stressed. In this way, you may want to think about ways in which to limit stress or help your child to employ strategies apart from ticking that may help them with their stress. If something like this isn't possible and tics are really bothersome for you, troublesome for your child, or you might want to try teaching your child to have other strategies, such as having something to say if someone comments on their tics or makes a derogatory comment. This will go a long way to helping them with their self-esteem, but it may be worth doing some role play with your child or practicing with them what they might say if people comment on their tics in school, out in public. They may not even have to say anything. It may just be about offering your child a space to know that it is okay to ignore such comments and it is okay to try not to be hurt by them. Something else which some people find helps are relaxation strategies. It's important to note that for some young people, the tics occur more frequently when they are relaxed, so this may not work. However, if a tic is caused by stress, sometimes gentle relaxation strategies may help go some way to reducing that stress. These can be things like teaching the child deep breathing techniques, maybe even teaching the child how to do some meditation or mindfulness. There are many resources available online, such as on websites like YouTube, and in the end, I'll point you to some resources specifically for young people with tics and Tourette syndrome. Some of these include relaxation methods. If the tic itself causes any pain or muscle spasms, gentle relaxation techniques like massage, so physical relaxation techniques, may help. Something else which might help is to encourage scheduled activities or breaks for the child. These may include things like breaks from screen time, also breaks from homework, and telling them ways in which they can maybe take breaks when they're in school. One other thing that is very powerful is around educating your child's peers, teachers, and relatives about tics. I spoke a little bit about the importance of doing this, but it may be worth really taking some time to sit down with people who spend a lot of time with your child, such as relatives, your friends, their school friends, and even talking to the teachers just about what the tic disorder is. You don't have to go in any great detail, but providing a little bit of understanding and knowledge around what the tic is, what they may see, and maybe even how they should respond to it can be very powerful for that young person if other people around them have that knowledge so they aren't surprised or don't react in ways which may lower the child's self-esteem. In addition, informing teachers of the nature of the child's tics and maybe letting the teachers know that it's okay to ignore them, it's okay not to comment on them, and it's not something they need to be alarmed about can be very, very important. It also is very important role modelling for the rest of the class. There are many resources online that teachers can access around tic disorders. These include videos, but also PDFs and FAQs that they can employ, and they may even want to share with some of their colleagues. Things like this will be available in the websites on the resources section. I've spoken a little bit about self-esteem. However, it's really important we dedicate some time to talk about this in more detail. Another tool to consider in your toolkit is whether your child needs support in improving their self-esteem. Self-esteem describes the way we feel about ourselves most of the time. And this can be really affected by all children, in all children, for a lot of different reasons, especially in children who are told off for making movements or sounds that they really can't help and they aren't doing intentionally. If a child is told they are naughty enough times, they might start to really believe they are, and with time that might turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy where it affects their behaviour. People with high self-esteem generally feel good about themselves the majority of the time. They're usually confident and outgoing, and are likely to be more sociable. It's not possible to feel good about yourself all of the time, but it's really just about making sure that your child feels good about themselves the majority of the time, and that if they don't feel good about themselves, it's not because of a neurological condition they didn't ask for and can't help. People with low self-esteem feel uncertain or negative about themselves the majority of the time. They may not feel as good, they may not feel as clever, or they may not feel as attractive as other people. We know low self-esteem is related to a lot of other mental health disorders, such as depression and anxiety. What we're trying to do is we're really trying to counteract the low self-esteem that may come along with having a tic disorder. There are many things that you as a parent can do to improve your child's self-esteem. I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes now to think about two things. Firstly, what you are currently doing to help your child improve their self-esteem, and also some of the things that you think you could be doing to help your child to improve their self-esteem. If you could take 5 minutes now to think about this and maybe jot a couple of things down before moving on to the next section. The key to supporting your child in having healthy and long-lasting self-esteem is around having a supportive network around them. This includes having a supportive peer group, having supportive parents, and also having supportive teachers. Being well supported in all the networks around you is linked to better outcomes. A child who is well supported will be more likely to accept who they are and will be more content in their inabilities. A child that's able to accept that the annoying tics they experience are part of their condition and cannot be helped will be more likely to go on to develop not only higher self-esteem, but more robust self-esteem in the face of any difficulties that they may encounter in life. Here you'll find a list of different things that may help children build their self-esteem. Some of the things that you can do to improve your child's self-esteem as a parent include praise. It's really important to praise your child whenever you can. Do this with good sense and within reason, because you don't want it to become one of those things where you're praising them for absolutely everything and it loses its meaning. But there's something to be said for praise that comes regularly and is well-meaning. It's also very important to show support for your child and also encouragement with your child, showing faith in things like their ideas and their abilities. Giving your child responsibilities at home and responsibilities at school, if you can, really will help build their self-esteem. Giving them small tasks and duties which you know that they're able to fulfill will give them a sense of achievement when they're later able to fulfill them. In addition, it will be really nice for your child to know that you trust them with these kinds of tasks. There's something to be said for giving your child lots of varied experiences in life. This means things like encouraging hobbies and encouraging interests that they might be able to pursue at home, at school, and in their spare time. This is about giving them a varied experience and also giving them a sense of mastery, knowing that when they try something and work hard at it, they're able to achieve well. One thing that is also very important is around teaching your child how to cope with disappointment. If your child is disappointment, it's really important to acknowledge how they must be feeling. Even small things like just saying, that must have been really disappointing for you, or asking them how they feel and then validating that feeling and normalizing that feeling as a normal human experience will go a long way. It's also really important to try and praise them for trying and trying to do their best. Something else that might also help is around planning regular individual play dates, just for you and your child alone. A space where you'll not be interrupted. It can be brief, it can be structured, it can also be unstructured, but it's just about spending one-on-one time with your child. That may help improve their self-esteem and will also go some way in fostering the relationship between you two. Active listening generally is very important. So listening not with an idea of what you're going to then go on to say, but just listening to what they're saying. And then following up with maybe some non-judgmental questions, such as, I wonder what made you do that? Lastly, it's really important to be generous with any love and affection you may show. Everyone shows their love in many different ways, and parents as well show their love in different ways. Everyone has their own love language. For some people it may be more physical, for some people it may be more verbal, for some people it may be around doing things for your child. But just being generous in the way that you show your love and your affection to your child will go a long way to building their self-esteem and fostering a healthy sense of self-esteem within them. I'm going to direct you to a YouTube video. If you click on an exercise in understanding in the PowerPoint presentation, you should be taken to YouTube. Hopefully that will open a video. If not, go to YouTube. In the search bar, type in Harvey's Film, that's 2 words, spelled Harvey', and then film. I just had a quick look now, and approximately number 4 or 5 in the search results should be a 3-minute 13-second video called Harvey's Film by Tourette's Action, and it looks a little bit like that. Please go to YouTube and watch this video. For some people, their tics can be very noticeable, and they may draw unwanted attention in the form of unkind words or unkind comments. This is probably because people don't understand the tics, and you can support your child in having an answer ready if people make these comments. This answer could tell them a bit more about the tics if they want to, or it could just be a way for them to protect themselves from unkind words. From our standpoint, it's really encouraged that you share information with your child's teacher or their school Senko about their tics. You can share as much as you want to, and there are lots of handy resources in the resources I'll direct you towards. In these resources, you'll find some information specifically for teachers and Senkos around tics and Tourette syndrome. Your child themselves may want to share information about tics to their class, or they may want the teacher to do it if this is needed. It may be worth having a discussion with your child before they start school around whether they would feel comfortable addressing the class to tell them a little bit about the tics, or if they'd like the teacher to do it. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything in great depth, but it could just be as much as the teacher telling the class that the child may do certain things and telling the class how they should respond to these things. Good role modelling is essential here. If the teacher role models a response that ignores the tics or pays very little attention to them, the class will follow as they get used to them. Most young people with tic disorders have no difficulties at school in terms of completing and understanding the schoolwork that is given. Sometimes we find there are specific tics which may get in the way of practically completing work. For example, a hand tic may get in the way of handwriting. For some people, having vocal and motor tics during the school day can be incredibly embarrassing and may be disruptive to them, and so we find many young people go to great efforts to suppress their tics during school hours. This in itself involves significant energy and concentration, and unfortunately, this energy and effort spent trying to suppress the tics may actually distract your child. There are a plethora of resources out there that schools and teachers can draw upon to think a little bit more about how they may support a child with tics. Tourette's Action is a pressure group which works for the rights of people with tic disorders. They have a lot of great material on their website that's aimed towards parents and carers, people with tics, and also the general public, as well as schools and teachers. Great Ormond Street Hospital also has a website which has a lot of lovely materials around tic disorders. A lot of this stuff is easy to read and readily accessible. And if you think your child's teacher could benefit from knowing a bit more about tic disorders, there's no harm in printing this information out and giving it to them or directing them towards this information themselves. I mentioned it earlier, but some of the resources that I'll direct you towards use the term Tourette syndrome. This does not mean that your child has Tourette syndrome, it's just that some of the pressure groups that exist use the term Tourette syndrome for different reasons. In terms of more practical things you can suggest, your child's teacher can demonstrate tolerance. They can be a great role model to the rest of the class and model active ignoring of the tics. Eventually, the rest of the class will follow suit. If your child's tics may affect the privacy or safety of others and may involve touching or shouting, the teacher can think a little bit about creative ways to work around the tics. This is where some of these resources will come in handy, and it may also be helpful if you talk to the teacher and let them know any things that you have tried that have helped, and also let them know things that you know do not help with the tics. It may be worth speaking to the teacher or the SENCO around opportunities to give your child short breaks to reduce any stress they may be experiencing, which may then reduce their tics. It may also be helpful for your child if they are seated by a supportive friend group. Some children find having a private place to relax if they become stressed can be really helpful, and some schools do try hard to facilitate this. Some schools also offer a private space for testing, so if there are any exams, children with tics are able to sit in somewhere where they feel a bit more supported and that may be a little bit more quiet from the rest of the class. If your child has to do presentations, maybe you want to eliminate this. The stress of having to do a presentation in front of the class or in front of an audience while you have a tic disorder may be quite difficult and may cause your child increased stress, which could cause increased ticking. There are creative ways to work around this with the teachers or the school, but one strategy is to ask whether your child can record their presentation ahead of time instead. All of these things count as reasonable adjustments, and they are protected by law, as a tic is recognised as a disability. Here is a list of some of the resources out there. What I like about these resources is that they're quite varied. On each of these websites, you'll find information geared towards you as a parent or carer of a young person with a tic disorder, information geared towards the person with a tic disorder themselves, information geared towards the school of the young person with a tic disorder, and information geared towards different facets of their wider network, such as friends and extended family members. Also, there are a lot of YouTubers who speak about the experience of living with a tic disorder or Tourette syndrome. If you go to YouTube and type in tic disorder, Tourette syndrome, or something similar, you'll find a lot of videos of people speaking about their experiences. Seeing something like this can be quite normalizing for your child, especially when it comes from someone who's around their same age. It may also help foster a sense of community with other individuals with tic disorders. It's important to note though, like anything that you'll find on YouTube and on the internet that's not from an accredited source, if you want to follow any advice from these individuals, please do so sparingly and with caution. Any advice that you follow, especially in terms of medical advice or medication, should come from an accredited website, such as the NHS. One other such resource is Tourette's Action. This charity has a website with lots of information on Tourette syndrome and tic disorders, from causes, support groups, research, and just general information. Unfortunately, it seems that the Northeast chapter of Tourette's Action isn't currently running. Hopefully this should change soon, and if it does, we will update you. The Tourette's Association of America also has a lot of really great information on their website. It does come from a slightly more American standpoint, but a lot of the information is still the same. Tourette Canada also has a lot of great information on their website, and it may be something to look at which is a little bit different. I mentioned Great Ormond Street Hospital earlier, but their website has a lot of great information for young people, from what it's like living with Tourette's to managing with things that come alongside with Tourette syndrome and tic disorders, like bullying, depression, anxiety. They also have a really great guide on how to make friends when you have a tic disorder or Tourette syndrome. If you Google Tourette syndrome, Great Ormond Street Hospital, these things will come up. As I mentioned earlier, some of this information is geared towards individuals with tic disorders and not only with individuals with Tourette's. Life's a Twitch website is great. They have this thing called the Break Shop, which has lots of information about what it's like living with a brain that has leaky breaks and may cause disorders such as tic disorders, Tourette syndrome, and other disorders such as OCD and ADHD. It's really user-friendly, and they have sections that are geared more towards the young person and also sections that are geared more towards the parents, the carers. Generally, if you type in Tourette's Action on YouTube or also on their website, you'll find a lot of great videos from different professionals and also from individuals with first-hand experience of tics. So if maybe you don't want to look at some of the information on YouTube because you're not sure about how accurate it is, Tourette Section has some great videos. BT Coach is an app for people with Tourette syndrome, and it's got a bit of information about some of those behavioural techniques I mentioned earlier. If you Google it, it also comes up on your PC, but if you want to download the app, you'll have to do that on your phone or your tablet. If you're attending this workshop in person, we provide some of the handouts from the NHS, Great Ormond Street Hospital and Tourette Action website themselves. However, because we are accessing this remotely, it may be worth doing a quick Google and accessing the PDFs yourself. There's a lot of great information out there. Some of it will be more relevant to you, some of it will be less relevant to you, some of it will be worded in a way that you don't really like, some will be worded in a way that you do like, and so it's worth kind of shopping around a little bit. Here's a screen grab of the break shop that I was talking about earlier. It's part of the Child and Parent Resource Institute, and it has an online leaky break shop series which includes a tic management toolbox. It describes neurological conditions such as tic disorders as neurological disorders which are not a result of poor parenting or a lack of motivation or poor intelligence. Much like our car has a braking system to help it stop, so do we. Our brakes are in our brain, and when our brakes are leaky, we may have a hard time stopping certain parts of ourselves. This may include tic disorders and Tourette syndrome. Fortunately, the symptoms of leaky brakes can be managed and reduced to help your child reach their full potential. I've mentioned Tourette Action a few times during this workshop. Here's a little bit more information on how you might reach them. They have a website, which is here. They have a telephone number, email address, and also postal address. So if you want to get in touch with them, there are many different ways you can do that. Tourette Action also has its own YouTube channel, which has a range of videos, including videos from professionals and also videos from individuals with first-hand experience of tic disorders and Tourette syndrome. As I mentioned earlier, there are also more informal channels on YouTube run by individuals with tic disorders and Tourette syndrome, where they speak about what it's like living with tic disorders. This addresses many aspects of everyday life with tic disorders and can be really good for your child's self-esteem. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to take all this information with a grain of salt as it's not been checked by professionals. However, it's still a great resource that's worth checking out. On this slide, you'll find a link. If you click it, it will take you to a guided relaxation that you can buy for 99p. All proceeds go to the charity Tourette Action. This guided relaxation is geared towards individuals with tic disorders. It's different from traditional mindfulness and relaxation techniques where you might focus on one thing for a period of time, such as your breathing. These more traditional mindfulness techniques can be such a challenge for people with tics that some of them find it's more of a hindrance than a help. This exercise, which I've given you a link to, focuses more on thought processes that may be related to the tics. It's about becoming more aware of the urges to tic and then exploring the possibility of riding the wave of these urges without engaging in the tic itself. There are thousands of books out there for young people with tic disorders, and here are a selection of some of these books. They're aimed at different age ranges. The two on the bottom right are for teens and are both recently published. The Tourette Survival Kit is a very good accessible workbook that your teen can work through by themselves. The others are aimed at children at a range of ages who may struggle with tic disorders. I've already mentioned the Great Ormond Street Hospital website and also Tourette Action, but here's what they look like. On the Great Ormond Street Hospital website, you'll find a Tourette syndrome information pack with information split into resources for families and resources for young people. Tourette Action also has a great resource library that may be helpful for you to access. Another resource is a tic monitoring sheet. The tic monitoring sheet is a diary or record of the tics. You would record them by counting the number of tics that occur every day during the same 15-minute period. Ideally, you would try to do this in the same place and the same time every day. So if you did this at 9 a.m. to 9:15 a.m. the first day, you try and do this at the same time and ideally the same place in the subsequent days. You would try to do this for about 5 to 7 times. Choose a time when your child's not overly conscious that you're tracking the tics, and this way you can monitor any changes in the tic patterns and any effects of any strategies that you've tried to put in place. You would do this for as long as necessary, but 5 to 7 times a week would probably be best. The more often you're able to do this, the better. At this point, I would usually ask you if you had any questions for me about tic disorders or Tourette syndrome. Unfortunately, we're not able to facilitate a live Q&A session, so I'll now go through some of the most frequently asked questions that we get from parents and carers of individuals with tic disorders. Here are 4 of the most frequently asked questions that we get from parents and carers about tics. The first is, if my child holds their tics in, won't they all just burst out later when they stop? Studies show that practicing holding in tics reduces tics overall. We don't see a rebound effect, whereby stopping your tics then makes them come back with increased strength. We find the opposite is true. Practicing holding in your tics means that there is generally a reduction in tics overall. The next question is, if my child stops one tic, won't his other tics just get worse? The opposite is true. When looked at in studies, learning to control your tics might actually have a bit of a generalized effect on the rest of your tics, making them slightly better in terms of a reduction in how often you have them. This can be generalized to even the tics the young person hasn't worked on. The next question is, if my child meets other children with tics, will they catch new tics off them? This is somewhat true. Tics are suggestible, and children may briefly catch new tics from other children with tics. However, these tic bouts are usually short-lived and last about a day or 2. Another question. If my child is busy fighting their tics, won't they find it difficult to pay attention to anything else? This may happen at first, because controlling tics takes time and mental effort. So maybe practicing holding in their tics in a key lesson, an important exam, or something else that requires a lot of attention and concentration isn't the best place. However, it may be worth practicing holding in their tics in times when they don't need to pay so much attention, or in small ways, such as only for 2 minutes at a time, and then 3 minutes at a time, and then building up from there. 2 more frequently asked questions are, will my child always have Tourette syndrome? If your child has been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, yes, it is a lifelong condition. However, many people have fewer or less noticeable tics as they grow older. We find that tics are usually worse between the ages of 7 and 12. And after this age, they generally get less noticeable and happen less frequently. Children may also learn ways to manage with their tics, which may reduce them. Following late adolescence, a lot of children may stop having tics. Will tics affect my child being able to go to college or university? Many people with Tourette syndrome and tic disorders do not need special help in education. However, it's worth letting someone at college know you have Tourette syndrome, or letting someone at the university know that you struggle with Tourette syndrome or tic disorders. If you have special needs, some colleges offer extra support, and it's worth noting that as a disability, colleges are legally required to offer support, so are universities and schools. So it's worth letting the school know. Even if you don't need any extra support, it's worth just giving them a heads up so they're aware. Another question we sometimes get from parents whose children shout or swear is, I can't ignore the swearing or I'm a bad parent. Understandably, some tics will be easier to ignore than others. But do remember, these are involuntary tics, so your child can't help doing or saying these things. Although it's challenging to hear these things, especially in public, it's much more challenging for the person who can't control their tics, but desperately wants to. These tics can bring lots of unwanted attention, and this is the very opposite to what they might need or want. By explaining the behaviour to family or friends, or other people the child may be around in advance, can be very helpful, just so they're able to prepare themselves and aren't taken by surprise. Unfortunately, we know it's not able to always do this, but in situations where you can, it's worth letting people know in advance. In some cases, a person with Tourette syndrome that involves swearing may be able to find another word or sound to replace the obscene or inappropriate word. This works sometimes, but it's not always possible. It's really important to try to see beyond the social taboo of these swear words. It's possible to try to attune your listening, filter things out, or try and take away your emotional response to what are, in essence, meaningless words. Instead, you should try to respond with openness, empathy, and support, because the person is not choosing to say these words, they can't help it. Thank you very much for taking your time to attend our workshop on tics and Tourette syndrome. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you found today helpful, that you've learned something, and that there have been some strategies that we've shared that you think you might be able to put in practice, or that you think might be able to help you support your child or your loved one. I wish you all the best, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.